The heavy oak doors of the courtroom seemed to loom larger than usual as Kendrick Robinson approached. He was already running late, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. He hated being...
Welcome to Shadow Crime. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started.
Late, especially for something as important as this, a hearing regarding his property tax assessment. He'd been fighting an uphill battle against the county assessor's office for months, disputing a sudden, inexplicable spike in his property taxes. He'd meticulously gathered his documents, prepared his arguments, and planned to present a clear, concise case. But a flat tire on the way to the courthouse had thrown a wrench in his carefully laid plans. He slipped through the doors, his eyes immediately scanning the room for an empty seat. The hearing was already in progress. Judge Charles Whitman, a stern-faced man with a reputation for being a stickler for rules, was presiding. Kendrick winced. He knew this wasn't going to be good. He quietly made his way to an empty chair in the back row, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. He held his breath, hoping the judge wouldn't notice his late arrival. No such luck. Judge Whitman paused mid-sentence, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, finally landing on Kendrick. His eyes narrowed. "Mr. Robinson," he said, his voice sharp and laced with disapproval. "You are late." "I apologize, Your Honor," Kendrick said, his voice slightly breathless. "I had a flat tire. I tried to get here as quickly as possible." "This court does not tolerate tardiness, Mr. Robinson," Judge Whitman said, his voice cold and unforgiving. "Your lack of respect for this court is appalling." Kendrick felt a flush of anger and shame creep up his neck. He opened his mouth to explain further, to plead his case, but Judge Whitman cut him off. "I am fining you $750 for contempt of court," he declared, his voice booming through the courtroom. "This will serve as a reminder of the importance of punctuality and respect for the judicial process." Kendrick was stunned. $750? For being a few minutes late? It seemed excessive, disproportionate, even cruel. He looked around the courtroom, his eyes searching for some sign of understanding, some indication that others shared his sense of disbelief. That's when he noticed it. A few rows ahead of him, a woman was quietly slipping into an empty seat. She was clearly even later than he was. She whispered an apology to the people around her, her face flushed with embarrassment. But Judge Whitman didn't acknowledge her. He didn't reprimand her. He didn't fine her. A few minutes later, another man entered the courtroom, even later than the woman. He, too, slipped into an empty seat without a word from the judge. Kendrick felt a cold knot of suspicion tighten in his stomach. He looked at the woman, then at the man. Both were white. He, Kendrick, was black. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about punctuality. It wasn't about respect for the court. It was about something else entirely. Something far more insidious. Something he'd experienced before, in different forms, throughout his life. He sat there, listening to the proceedings, his mind racing. He replayed the scene in his head, analyzing every detail, every nuance. The judge's tone, his body language, the way he'd singled him out, the way he'd ignored the other latecomers. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a pattern of unfairness, of bias, of differential treatment, a pattern that, he suspected, extended far beyond this single courtroom, this single incident. He had come to fight his property tax assessment, but he was now facing a much larger, much more daunting battle. A battle against a system that seemed rigged against him, a system that judged him not by the content of his character or the merits of his case, but by the color of his skin. And he knew with a sinking certainty that this was just the beginning. The hearing on Kendrick's property tax assessment proceeded, but he found it difficult to focus. The judge's pronouncements, the lawyer's arguments, the presentation of evidence. It all seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the glaring injustice he had just witnessed. The $750 fine, while significant, was no longer his primary concern. He was grappling with a much larger, much more disturbing realization. The system itself seemed to be stacked against him. He started to observe Judge Whitman more closely, paying attention not just to his words, but to his tone, his body language, his interactions with the other people in the courtroom. He watched as the judge heard a series of cases, each one seemingly minor, yet each one revealing a subtle but unmistakable pattern. A young black man, charged with a minor traffic violation, was lectured sternly and fined the maximum amount allowed. By law, a white woman charged with a similar offense was given a warning and a gentle reprimand. A black woman disputing a parking ticket was repeatedly interrupted and cut off by the judge, her arguments dismissed with a wave of his hand. A white man, making a similar argument, was treated with respect and deference, his claims carefully considered. Kendrick felt a growing sense of unease, a cold knot of anger tightening in his stomach. He saw it in the way Judge Whitman addressed the black defendants, his voice sharp and accusatory, his gaze cold and unforgiving. He saw it in the way he addressed the white defendants, his tone softer, his demeanor more lenient, his body language more relaxed. He saw it in the small details, the way the black defendants were scrutinized more closely, their documents examined with greater suspicion, their explanations met with greater skepticism. He saw it in the way the white defendants were given the benefit of the doubt, their stories accepted at face value, their excuses readily accommodated. It wasn't just about the outcomes of the cases, although those too seemed disproportionately harsh for the black defendants. It was about the process, the subtle but pervasive ways in which the system seemed to be tilted against them. It was about the unspoken assumptions, the unconscious biases, the ingrained prejudices that seemed to permeate every aspect of the courtroom proceedings. Kendrick realized that this wasn't just about him, about his property taxes, or about his late arrival. It was about something much bigger, something systemic. It was about the way the justice system, in this small town, in this particular courtroom, seemed to operate differently for people of color. He felt a surge of anger, but also a sense of determination. He couldn't ignore what he was seeing. He couldn't simply accept this injustice. He had to do something. He had to fight back, not just for himself, but for all the others who had been and would continue to be treated unfairly by this system. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew he was up against a powerful, entrenched system, but he also knew that he couldn't stand idly by and watch it happen. He had a voice, and he was going to use it. Kendrick Robinson wasn't just a homeowner fighting an unfair property tax assessment. He was also a data analyst, a man who understood the power of numbers, the eloquence of statistics, the undeniable truth that could be revealed by careful examination of data. He decided to use his professional skills to investigate his growing suspicions about Judge Whitman and the systemic bias within the local court system. He started by requesting public records, meticulously gathering data on every case Judge Whitman had presided over for the past 5 years. He focused on cases similar to his own, minor offenses, traffic violations, property disputes, where the judge had significant discretion in determining the outcome and the penalty. He spent hours poring over the records, entering the data into spreadsheets, creating charts and graphs, searching for patterns. It was tedious work, painstaking and time-consuming, but he was driven by a burning sense of purpose, a determination to uncover the truth. As the data began to accumulate, a clear and disturbing picture emerged. The numbers didn't lie. Judge Whitman's sentencing patterns showed a consistent and significant disparity between black and white defendants. For the same offenses, black defendants were, on average, fined 300% more than white defendants. They were more likely to be found guilty, more likely to receive the maximum penalty, and less likely to be granted leniency or offered alternative sentencing options. The statistical evidence was damning. But Kendrick knew he needed more than just numbers. He needed human stories, first-hand accounts of the injustices that had been perpetrated in Judge Whitman's courtroom. He started reaching out to people in the community, talking to neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, sharing his findings and asking if they had any similar experiences. The floodgates opened, stories poured in, each one a testament to the systemic bias that had permeated the local court system for years. A black woman recounted how she had been fined hundreds of dollars for a minor parking violation, while a white man who had committed the same offense had been let off with a warning. A black teenager described being harassed and intimidated by Judge Whitman during a traffic court hearing, his testimony dismissed as disrespectful. A black business owner told of being repeatedly targeted with frivolous code violations, while similar violations by white-owned businesses were ignored. Each story added another layer of evidence, another piece to the puzzle. Kendrick meticulously documented each account, gathering names, dates, case numbers, creating a comprehensive dossier of Judge Whitman's biased and discriminatory behavior. He wasn't just building a case. He was building a movement. He was giving voice to the voiceless, exposing the hidden injustices that had plagued his community for far too long. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was armed with the truth, and he was determined to fight for justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged by Judge Whitman and the system he represented. The spark that ignited the firestorm came from an unexpected source, a law student named Sarah Miller, who had been observing the proceedings in Judge Whitman's courtroom as part of a class assignment. Sarah, a bright and idealistic young woman, with a keen eye for injustice, had witnessed Kendrick's hearing and had been deeply disturbed by what she had seen. She wrote a detailed account of the incident, including her observations of Judge Whitman's biased behavior and the statistical disparities in his sentencing patterns. She posted her account on social media, not expecting much of a response, but the internet, as it often does, had other plans. Sarah's post went viral. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, drawing comments, outrage, and calls for action from people across the country. The story of Kendrick Robinson and Judge Whitman, the small-town injustice, had struck a nerve, resonating with a broader national conversation about racial bias in the justice system. Local news outlets picked up the story, then regional and, finally, national. Reporters descended on the small town, eager to interview Kendrick, Sarah, and anyone else who had been affected by Judge Whitman's actions. The courthouse, once a symbol of quiet, unquestioned authority, became the center of a media frenzy. Civil rights organizations, alerted to the situation by the viral post and the growing media coverage, joined the fray. The NAACP, the ACLU, and other groups issued statements condemning Judge Whitman's behavior and demanding a full investigation. They organized protests, held press conferences, and put pressure on local officials to take action. The community, emboldened by the national attention and the support of these powerful organizations, rallied around Kendrick. They shared their own stories of injustice, organized petitions, and demanded that Judge Whitman be held accountable for his actions. The pressure became overwhelming. The Judicial Review Board, the body responsible for overseeing the conduct of judges, announced that it was launching a formal investigation into Judge Whitman's behavior. They reviewed the data Kendrick had compiled, interviewed witnesses, and examined court records. The findings were damning. The investigation confirmed what Kendrick had already uncovered. Judge Whitman had engaged in a pattern of racially biased sentencing, consistently treating black defendants more harshly than white defendants. The evidence was irrefutable, the conclusion inescapable. Judge Whitman's courtroom was not a place of justice, it was a place of prejudice. The system, designed to protect the rights of all citizens, had been corrupted, and the consequences for the black community had been devastating. The quiet, unassuming town had become the epicenter of a national scandal, a symbol of the systemic racism that still plagued the American justice system. The weight of the evidence, the public outcry, and the looming threat of disciplinary action proved too much for Judge Charles Whitman. Faced with the undeniable reality of his biased behavior and the imminent collapse of his career, he chose the path of least resistance. He resigned. His resignation letter was short and terse, offering no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. He simply stated that he was stepping down, effective immediately, for personal reasons. But everyone knew the real reason. He had been exposed, his prejudice laid bare for all to see. His carefully constructed facade of judicial impartiality had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The news of Whitman's resignation was met with a mixture of relief and celebration in Greenville. People gathered in the streets, sharing stories, shaking hands, and expressing a cautious optimism about the future. The tyrant had been dethroned. The system, however flawed, had worked, at least in this one instance. But the victory was bittersweet. The damage had been done. Years of injustice could not be undone with a single resignation. The community had been scarred. Trust in the legal system had been eroded, and the lives of countless individuals had been irrevocably altered by Whitman's biased rulings. The focus now shifted to repairing the damage and preventing future abuses. A wave of reforms swept through the local court system, driven by the demands of the community and the recommendations of the Judicial Review Board. Mandatory training on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity was implemented for all judges, court personnel, and law enforcement officers. A system of regular audits was established to review judicial decisions, identify patterns of bias, and hold judges accountable for their actions. An independent oversight committee composed of community members and legal experts was created to monitor the court system and ensure fairness and transparency. The changes weren't limited to Greenville. The story of Judge Whitman and Kendrick Robinson had resonated far beyond the small town, sparking similar calls for reform in other communities across the state. Legislators introduced bills aimed at addressing racial disparities in the justice system, strengthening judicial oversight, and promoting diversity on the bench. The fight for justice was far from over, but a significant battle had been won. A single act of defiance, a willingness to speak truth to power, had triggered a chain reaction, leading to real, tangible change. The story of Greenville became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the most entrenched systems of injustice can be challenged, and that even the smallest community can spark a revolution. The road to true equality was long, but the first steps had been taken, guided by the courage of one man and the collective determination of a community united in its pursuit of justice. Kendrick Robinson, the unassuming data analyst who had inadvertently become a champion of justice, found himself thrust into a new and unexpected role. A symbol of hope, a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for systemic change. His story, amplified by the media coverage and the viral social media posts, resonated with people across the country. He received countless messages of support from individuals who had experienced similar injustices, from lawyers and activists working to reform the legal system, and from ordinary citizens who were simply inspired by his courage and determination. He was invited to speak at law schools, community centers, and legal conferences, sharing his experience and offering his insights on the challenges of racial bias in the justice system. He spoke with passion and eloquence, drawing on his personal story and his expertise in data analysis to paint a compelling picture of the systemic inequalities that plagued the courts. He became a mentor to young lawyers, particularly those from minority backgrounds, encouraging them to pursue careers in public service and to use their legal skills to fight for justice. He emphasized the importance of ethical conduct, of challenging the status quo, and of never giving up on the pursuit of a more equitable legal system. The reforms that Kendrick had helped to initiate in Greenville began to bear fruit. The training, programs for judges and court personnel led to a noticeable shift in attitudes and behaviors. The audits of judicial decisions revealed a significant decrease in racial disparities in sentencing. The Independent Oversight Committee provided a crucial check on judicial power, ensuring greater accountability and transparency. Greenville became a model for other communities across the state, demonstrating that meaningful change was possible, that even deeply entrenched systems of bias could be reformed. Kendrick's story and the reforms it inspired served as a blueprint for other activists and policymakers working to create a more just and equitable legal system. He never sought the spotlight, never considered himself a hero. He was simply a man who had been wronged, who had refused to remain silent, and who had used his skills and his voice to fight for what was right. But in doing so, he had become something more, a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of individual action, and an inspiration to all those who believed in the promise of a truly just and equitable society. He had shown that even the smallest voice, when raised in the pursuit of truth, can create ripples that transform the world. And that, he knew, was a legacy worth fighting for. The story of Kendrick Robinson, a data analyst who challenged a racially biased judge, is a powerful testament to the enduring importance of civic engagement, the pursuit of justice, and the potential for even one individual to spark meaningful change. It offers profound lessons, particularly resonant for those of us who have witnessed decades of social and political evolution, and who understand the ongoing need for vigilance and action. One of the most crucial takeaways is the reminder that justice is not a given. It is a constant struggle. Judge Whitman's biased rulings, his seemingly arbitrary enforcement of the law, highlight the fragility of our legal system and the ways in which prejudice can infiltrate even the most hallowed institutions. As we age, we gain a deeper appreciation for the hard-won victories of the past, and we understand that the fight for equality and fairness is a continuous process, requiring constant attention and unwavering commitment. We must never take justice for granted. We must actively defend it. The story also underscores the power of data and the importance of critical thinking. Kendrick's professional skills as a data analyst allowed him to uncover the hidden patterns of bias that had been operating unchecked in Judge Whitman's courtroom. This highlights the need for us to be informed, to question authority, and to seek out evidence-based truths, rather than relying on assumptions or accepting narratives at face value. In an age of misinformation and increasing polarization, critical thinking skills are more important than ever. As elders, we have a responsibility to share our experience, to encourage younger generations to question, to analyze, and to seek out the truth. Furthermore, the narrative emphasizes the vital role of community in challenging systemic injustice. Kendrick's efforts were amplified by the support of his neighbors, the involvement of civil rights organizations, and the attention of the media. This demonstrates that meaningful change rarely happens in isolation. It requires collective action, a willingness to work together, and a shared commitment to creating a more just and equitable society. As we age, we may find ourselves with more time and resources to devote to civic engagement. We can use our voices, our experience, and our networks to support causes we believe in, to advocate for change, and to build stronger, more inclusive communities. Finally, the story offers a message of hope and the enduring possibility of progress. Despite the deeply entrenched nature of racial bias, Kendrick's actions and the community's response led to real, tangible reforms. This reminds us that even seemingly insurmountable challenges can be overcome with courage, persistence, and a belief in the power of collective action. As elders, we can serve as beacons of hope, sharing our stories of resilience, inspiring younger generations to continue the fight for justice, and reminding them that even small acts of courage can have a profound impact on the world. We may not see the complete fulfillment of justice during our time, but what we do will create ripples for generations.